In the aftermath of the dollar flu, several hostile groups rose up to take advantage of the mayhem and reduction in law enforcement. So what would happen if we took one of the largest gangs from New York City and one from Washington DC and put them up against each other to fight for dominance? It wasn't long after the initial outbreak that many public services started to fail in New York City, and one of these areas being affected was the prison complex on Rikers Island. So unsurprisingly, the inmates took advantage of the blackout and the dwindling guard presence, and managed to overpower their captives and break free. Breaking off the island and into a number of neighbouring districts, a large group of convicts found themselves in Manhattan, one of the hardest hit areas in the city, where law enforcement was almost non-existent. One of the prison's most intimidating inmates, Lara Barrett, was highly successful in organising this group into a gang she called the Rikers. And eagerly, this hardened group of criminals relished in the anarchy, where they could do whatever they wanted, which included enacting revenge on the people that put them behind bars. Their ranks grew quickly, and they began to have a large number of followers, as many of the Riker Island inmates belonged to local New York gangs. This growth led to occasional infighting, but Barrett's iron-fisted leadership helped keep the gang in line. She was known for her ability to plan, organise, and lead, as well as being treacherous, murderous, and unforgiving. As the JTF withdrew from the streets of Manhattan, the Rikers flooded in behind them, quickly seizing control of entire neighbourhoods. The Rikers have one goal: eliminate anyone in a uniform. Where the other hostile factions were born from betrayal, revenge, or losing faith in the government's ability to get things done, the Hyenas are simply looking to cash in on the current state of the city. Resources were stretched thin across the city as the JTF attempted to control the outbreak. This meant that there were less people around to stop the unlawful activity committed by gangs and other criminal groups. With all of the free rein to do what they pleased, the severity of their crimes quickly escalated, and the gang territories further increased in size. But because of this, it led to gangs fighting between each other to see who could carve out most of the city for themselves. However, there was now another group that was to take to the streets of Washington DC. The True Sons had broken off from the JTF and formed their own group. The JTF and the government weren't getting results, so in order to bring structure back to the city, it was up to them. Anyone who stood in their way would be dealt with. JTF, civilians, and especially anyone who was creating more chaos during the crisis. The gangs of DC quickly found themselves outgunned and rapidly losing territory. The True Sons were militarized, disciplined, and had far superior weapons and equipment. And unlike the law enforcement from before the outbreak, they weren't there to arrest them. They were there to exterminate them. Eventually, a gang leader who went by the alias Coyote managed to bring 6 of the largest gangs together and proposed that they stop fighting amongst themselves and unify. They all faced a common enemy who was too strong to take on alone, but together they would stand a chance. This group would soon be known as the Hyenas. Both factions have a number of loose roles within their ranks. The bulk of Rikers are made up of the assault class and are skilled in the use of their weapons. But they also have explosive experts and tanks who are equipped with nail guns and riot shields. The personnel placed in the Russia role have been afforded this because they have proven time and time again to be too erratic and have a lack of danger awareness. The heavy weapons Rikers are ex-military. Their training, armour and heavy machine guns offer powerful support to the rest of the army. The Hyenas typically prefer close-range combat, but they do have other classes in support. For example, their controllers are considered to be the intellectuals within the group. They have knowledge in mechanics and operate remote-control cars rigged with explosives. Hyena engineers use their sniper turrets to suppress enemies, while the bulk of the Russia classes get into place. Their Russias are loose cannons and can often be seen using drugs to boost their adrenaline before beelining straight towards the enemy. Other than a handful of Rikers who are ex-military, the bulk of the members in each of these groups have minimal to no recognised military or firearms training. but due to the nature of where they came from and what they were doing before the outbreak, they're reasonably familiar with weapons and how to use them. When coming up against a more disciplined foe, they more than make up for this with brutality and sheer numbers. Both factions can be seen wielding various types of assault rifles, LMGs, marksman rifles, SMGs, and shotguns. Most of their weapons have been acquired from prison guards, JTF, peacekeepers, and other hostile factions. Hyenas tend to prefer the use of close-range weapons like submachine guns, pistols, and shotguns, as well as riot shields, shock batons, and a variety of grenades. Rikers recognise the need for variety in their arsenal, placing slightly more importance on light machine guns, sniper turrets, and remote-controlled cars with explosives strapped to them. The Hyenas typically prefer to quickly rush their enemies down and fight in close quarters. Their tactics involve forcing their opponents out of cover and managing to disorientate them before they can gather their bearings. Their combat is unorthodox. They disregard cover, shoot without aiming, and are often taking drugs before manically charging ahead. Shield, rusher, and assault archetypes are found closest to enemies, pushing ahead, while medic, engineer, and tank archetypes are closely behind setting up their equipment, reviving any dead hyenas, and laying down suppressive fire. Controller, thrower, and sniper archetypes are found at vantage points in the battlefield, using their gear to support their allies and disorientate enemies. The assault class makes up the backbone of the Riker forces. They will lay down fire while constantly attempting to catch their enemies off guard through flanking techniques. Rushers will push forward with shotguns and SMGs, while throwers sit back attempting to flush enemies out of cover using grenades. Riker snipers deal a decent amount of damage and should be focused down when present. Their tanks will move slowly through the battlefield, able to take considerable damage while their allies flank and get into position. The heavy weapon class lays down the bulk of their firepower, assembling shielded minigun platforms where they're able to provide a decent amount of suppressive fire. Both of these groups have resulted as opportunists from the aftermath of the outbreak. Scavengers, thieves and murderers who prey on the weak for resources and will kill for no other reason than entertainment. However, in this fight, I'm going to have to give it to the Rikers. The Hyenas show a complete lack of discipline, often found roaming around in groups and charging recklessly into battle rather than holding their ground. And this lack of tactics is really only made up for by the sheer numbers they have. Where the Rikers, although not trained in any way, they position themselves in a slightly more organised manner. Under the leadership of their former leader, Barrett, they resembled a force that was somewhat disciplined and had tactics to back it up. However, with her now dead, it isn't quite so obvious, but still swings in their favour. The main asset that the Hyenas hold is their numbers. As a loose guide, we could look at the number of gangs that are present in Washington, DC today. The gangs of DC are not the highly organised gangs of Los Angeles and Chicago, with their clearly identifiable hierarchies, initiation rites, and colours. Instead, if we look at crews of people, 10 or more, who commit crimes together, there are more than 70 known groups, some with over 100 members. But there is believed to be at least 200 more operating in the city. So if we wanted to come up with a conservative number, it would be safe to say that there are at least 5,000 gang members in DC who would have potentially fallen under the Hyena banner. And as the law states, their numbers were considerably bolstered by the collapse of society and the breakdown of law enforcement, where even people who may not have been this way inclined felt they had no choice but to join in order to survive. So maybe we're looking at 8,000, 10,000 even. Remember, these numbers could be considerably higher. Then we have the Rikers. At any time, Rikers Island usually houses around 10,000 inmates. Not all of these inmates are hardened, violent criminals. A decent chunk of them are there awaiting sentencing or a short term. Then we need to remember that a lot of them were getting sick from the virus. Let's say that 5,000 inmates were able to escape on the day that they overthrew the guards. They didn't all head straight to Manhattan. They also fled over to the other side of the river, into Queens. But let's be generous and say that 3,000 of the inmates landed on Manhattan and came together as one, under the leadership of Larry Barrett. So 3,000 slightly organised inmates, using a larger range of weapons and with more experience using them, versus 10,000 completely inexperienced street thugs who rely purely on numbers to overcome their enemies. Tough call, but I know which side I'd put my money on. and I'll tell you why. The largest issue that the hyenas have is the way that they're structured at the very top. They are led by a council. Each of the 6 members are the leader of their own clan within the hyenas. This leader represents them in the council, acting as the speaker and voice of his or her clan represented in the council. This has led to considerable infighting between the clans, where they are constantly scheming for ways to gain more resources and prominent positions within the overall gang. There is a lot of bickering and backstabbing. They all hate each other and would gladly stab each other in the back when the opportunity presents itself. This has led to leadership that often changes hands. On top of this, the majority of the hyena members consists of youths and late teens. Yes, there was some infighting in the Rikers that was only being contained by Barrett, but later on, after her death, when they were under the leadership of rogue SHD agent James Dragoff, we see that over time their loyalty towards each other has only grown, as they now resemble more of a crime family. In summary, the hyenas' large numbers don't make up for their lack of discipline, organisation, training and experience. I'm not even going to get into the manufacture and use of drugs, and the fact that some of their archetypes are so ill-equipped to handle the explosives and weapons they're using, that they're more likely to do damage to their allies and themselves than others. I've had some really cool ideas come out of the comments for other videos where I pit groups or characters up against each other, both from within Tom Clancy and across other games too. I'm obviously relatively knowledgeable about Tom Clancy games, but the others may take me a little more time to research, which is good. Keep the suggestions coming. Anyway, thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers!